A quick disclaimer before we begin, the PEMF podcast does not contain any medical advice, and the content provided is for informational purposes only. If you have any health concerns, please visit a healthcare professional. Welcome back to another episode of the PEMF podcast. Today we're joined by someone you may have seen on YouTube and his videos about PEMF or through his book, PEMF, The Fifth Element of Health, and that's Bryant Meyers. We're going to explore some of the effects of PEMF that it has in the body, some of the mechanisms behind it. We're also going to look into the deeper, darker sides of the multi-therapy mat, so something you want us to tune into. Bryant, for anyone that hasn't heard of you or seen you before on YouTube, can you introduce yourself and just let everybody know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, of course, my name is Bryant Meyers. I did write a book called PEMF, The Fifth Element of Health. It's been, sold very well. I think over 100,000 copies now. I do have a popular YouTube channel. I've been very passionate about energy medicine since about 1995. I do have a master's degree in physics. I used to teach college math and physics at, Central Michigan and community colleges. But that was always kind of part-time. I'd always been passionate about health and wellness and energy medicine kind of on the side. And PEMF is something I've been really excited about since 2007. So it's been my main focus for about 17 years now. And I've tried and owned over $1 million in energy medicine devices, which is no exaggeration. And probably now I've owned about 40 PEMF devices. Currently testing out some high intensity just because people keep asking about it. And I'm like, okay, well, I keep an open mind. I never claim to have all the answers. So I have not spoken highly about high intensity in the past, but anyway, always testing and trying new devices, looking on my oscilloscope and trying to provide the best PEMF information. And I just end up affiliating for the devices that I really think are the best devices. So, which include a couple different brands. And yeah, it's been my passion. It's all that I do really, mostly full time, along with red light therapy. I do that on this. I have a red light therapy business too, but I would say PEMF is my main focus.
And that's good. And it's all good kind of knowing a PEMF device from the surface, seeing the anecdotal results that you get and all that sort of thing. But something unique about yourself is that you pull apart the devices, you look at them, see how they tick and how that affects the body. So it's interesting. We'll come into that a little bit more. What would be good to know is what was your first ever mention or involvement of PEMF? How did that happen? How did you stumble across the PEMF industry, and what was that story?
Yeah, just being into energy medicine, I'm just trying to remember the first PEMF device that I think it was the QRS way back in the early 2000s. Didn't really get a great result from it, so I never got excited about PEMF at that time. And then I think it was then I just tried some other things like the earth pulse and some things that were supposed to be good for sleep. And but again, this is me trying all these different energy devices, not just PEMF. Mm-hmm. But it never really, that didn't really do much for me. I got the Beamer back in like 2005. It was called the Beamer 3000 back then. And it's like, okay, people were like just raving about it. And it's like there was more buzz around that than say the others I had tried. I'm like, okay, people are saying all these great testimonials. And I think I used it for like 6 months and just kind of gave up on it. It wasn't really doing a whole lot for me. So then a couple years go by, and I think it was the Wolf Clinic. I was on Darren Wolf's email list, and I kind of kept in touch with a lot of these wellness. And he sent me an email about the MRS 2000 Designo, and he gave his testimonials and why it was great. I'm like, and me just trying everything. It's like, okay, well, why not? Let's just get it. So, with this unit, the first night I used it, I noticed better sleep the first night. And this is a time where I was having terrible insomnia. And the Beamer didn't help, and the Earth Pulse didn't help. And that's why, again, one of the things I was hoping for with the Earth Pulse, he was claiming, oh, you're going to sleep better. And it just didn't do it. But the IMRS, it worked. It worked. So I got my attention. It's like, wow, this is really working here. So being a networker, I had many of my friends try it out, and I was getting really good response, really great testimonials. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, this one really seems to be working. So it just kind of snowballed. And, and that's just been my experience with other devices I've worked with in the past is they just worked, right? So I can't be a part of something where it's not helping people. Like I had a 3-day I forgot to mention, I had a 3-day colon cleanse. That was my first really online business. And, my initials, Bryant Meyers, BM, I guess it was kind of fitting. Kind of funny. But that was really successful too. So I kind of learned how to do internet marketing with that 3-day colon cleanse. And then I got this Noblex K1 vibration machine through my friend and mentor, Peter Ragnar, who's a well-known like anti-aging and enlightenment type of, an abundance coach. He's just an amazing guy. So his whole group, I was networked to his whole group, and, they had this vibration platform, and that really was working for people. So the MRS 2000 was like that too. So that was like my third really big online business was the MRS 2000, which became the iMRS, and then MediConsult switched to Swiss Bionic. And so now, I do affiliate for other brands now. Back then I was just dedicated to them. I wasn't really recommending other devices, but
okay.
But and then over the years, I'm constantly trying out devices. So I try to keep an open mind, and I'm in a space now where, I'm, potentially, we'll see. We're working on developing a device that I can be a part of. So we'll see how that goes. But that's still I can't say a whole lot about that yet.
No, cool. That'll be interesting to find out more. Maybe we'll get you back for another episode when you can let us know how that's developing. You've been in the industry for quite a long time, so I'm going to kind of pick your brain on some of the subjects that we know our listeners will want to kind of know about. And going back to the very beginning of like PEMF and its first FDA approval for non-union bone fractures, quite a lot of people might not know about the story of Dr. Robert Becker and the frog and the salamander experiment and how that led to PEMF's first FDA approval. So I've heard you mention it before and talk about it before. So can you share that with our listeners?
Oh yeah. Well, some of my favorite books are like, Cross Currents and Body Electric, and, Robert Becker. He was one of the pioneers in electrotherapy, energy medicine. And one of his early studies, well, of course, his big contemplation was, how is it that salamanders regenerate and then like a whole limb, and why don't we? And why don't frogs that are close relatives of salamanders, right? So you'd think a frog and a salamander, they have all this genetic, all this commonalities in their genetics. Why don't they both regenerate? So he did a whole bunch of experiments, and he actually ended up mapping out like a whole electrical grid of the salamander. You may have seen, it's like an iconic picture of a salamander and like a whole electrical circuit superimposed, because he found that you have positive charge in the core of the salamander, like positive and the head, in the center of the head, and then the tail and the limbs had a negative charge. And of course, from a positive to a negative, you get what? You get a flow of current, right? So it turns out that when you cut off a salamander's arm, for example, or you could even take one of its, like a bit of its eye out, or like 1/3 of its brain, and it'll still regenerate. It's amazing. But the stump of a severed limb was an easier thing to test. And what Robert Becker found was that there was a very high, like a high voltage, or you could say it's almost like a live wire. Like there's current flowing to that stump. And what Robert Becker found, it was that electrical current, which is kind of, you can call it like injury current, is what it was been called over the years, is what stimulated the stem cells to regenerate, to differentiate and to regenerate the limb. The whole thing was driven by electrical current. And what he found with the frog was that the stump, the current, there wasn't a voltage swing like there was a salamander. There was a little bit, but not nearly. With the salamander, went way up. With the frog, it didn't really take that big swing. And the stump kind of healed over. So what he found was that when he added current to the frog stump, he could get a frog arm to regenerate too. So, of course, his big passion was, another contemplation of his is, why do bones heal better than some other types of tissues in the body that don't seem to heal as fast or at all sometimes? And so his interest was applying, for humans, this idea of stimulating microcurrents to regeneration, like salamanders, applying that to bones. And again, in the early days, they were using electrodes. They surgically implant electrodes on both sides of a fracture. especially like non-union fractures. He was, the fractures that didn't heal, and so, but that's a very invasive process, right? So it's actually an interesting story because Andrew Bassett was flying to a conference, an orthopedic surgeon conference, which Robert Becker was going to be a speaker at, and it just so happened that Arthur Pilla was in a seat on the plane right next to him, and Arthur Pilla was said that he was very nosy, so because Andrew was going to give a presentation too, and he was going over his what were those? Remember those old slides and the slide projectors? Maybe you don't remember.
Right?
But,
yeah. No idea. Yeah, just about.
Yeah. So he was going over his slides, and Arthur's like nosy. It's like he could see this little thing where it was dendritic outgrowth, and he's like, oh, because Arthur Pilla was he was like into like chemistry and electrical chemistry basically, and he's like, oh, I know what that is. That's dendritic outgrowth on like a metal that shorts out a metal circuit, when you got these little metal type of, almost hair-like, whisker-like things. And Andrew Bassett's like, no, that's bone. That's not metal. And it's like, this is current to stimulate bone. And he got really interested in that. So it turned out those two really hit it off. And Arthur was like, you can use induction coils. You don't have to surgically implant electrodes. And that was like, of course, the big aha. That's what PMF is, or you could say it's inductive coupling, right? So instead of applying current with electrodes to both sides of the bone, you can use a PMF coil and induce, through Faraday's law of induction, microcurrents naturally using your own body's natural charges. And it's much less invasive. And so they did a lot of research initially with beagles. And again, they're trying to find a non-union bone fracture solution that's non-invasive. And then they went from beagles to human studies. And then from human studies, they got FDA approval, I think in 1979, for their bone stimulator. But it all started with, understanding from, how do salamanders regenerate? And it's actually not, even John Birch back in the 1800s, they used electrodes for bone, but they had no idea. They don't really know why it was working back then. But that kind of got with the Flexner report, and it's kind of the dark ages in the U.S. here, where big pharma kind of took over for a while. But Robert Becker was the one, and a lot of others like him, to bring back electromedicine. It started as a surge back in the 60s and 70s, and I think it just keeps increasing in popularity because it works. It's natural, non-invasive solutions. Things like a non-union fracture, our medical system doesn't have an answer for it. So
no, and it's really interesting actually how the universe works because we've had this podcast lined up for a week or two now, and we've written all the questions for it. And we're mentioning this frog and salamander experiment, and 2 days ago I chopped the end of my finger off.
Oh,
so
no.
anyone that follows me on Instagram would have seen the story. I was putting up a mirror on the wall and managed to shatter the thing and lost a section of my thumb, me middle finger. So what I'm actually going to try and do, don't worry, I'm all patched up now, all back together. But what I actually want to do is do a bit of studies myself and to see how PMF is going to regrow that finger and how quickly. Because, it's like you say, it's part of the foundations of PMF.
One of the images that Robert Becker shared was he had someone that severed off. It was almost just above the knuckle even. It was like right, it wasn't the whole, it was like half of the tip of someone's finger. And he did this time lapse with like electro type of therapy and showed the regeneration process.
Yeah. So I'll be doing my own in-house study now on my own finger.
You definitely get PMF on it, and it will help to, again, stimulate those healing microcurrents that will stimulate stem cells and growth factors and regeneration. Yeah,
no, for sure. So I'll be sharing my story on that one anyway as time progresses. I'll let you know how I get on.
Great. Try to do a time lapse if you can. I don't know how bad it is, but
yeah. I've got initial pictures and videos of the wound, and it's cringeworthy. So I'll be sharing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So taking it back a little bit. well, no, sorry, bringing it forward a little bit. In more recent research, we see that PMF has the ability to increase ATP and nitric oxide. We haven't spoken about that too much on the podcast. So what effect, how's the PMF doing that, and what effect is that good for the body?
Yeah, to me, it all starts with, if you have a good PMF signal, we'll talk about slew rate in a little bit, that induces healing microcurrents, because that's one of the primary, most easily understood mechanisms of PMF, is that it's inducing microcurrents naturally, non-invasively, without electrodes, using your own body's, charges. And it's not just the calcium, sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And we have all these natural charges in our body that are, charges in solution. That's why we're conductive, right? So I have a little toy I hold on to. It's a little demonstration where, you put one hand on one side, then as soon as you touch the other, it like lights up and makes noise, because your body, the circuit is your whole body is a conductor. So we are conductors. We conduct electricity. And we have many conductive mediums. We have our bones are piezoelectric. Our nerve, obviously our nerves are conducting electricity all the time. Collagen, which is the primary protein in our body, in solution is a conductor. The premovascular system, the meridians, the acupuncture meridian system, has been linked to the premovascular system. That's been pretty well getting better and better mapped out. That's very conductive. So we have all these conductive pathways in the body, and that goes down to the cellular level and even the mitochondrial level. And so when you think of ATP happens in the mitochondria, right? And so it's through the Krebs cycle, and then through the electron transport chain, and then finally you got ATPase sort of creating ATP from ADP. Sometimes AMP to ADP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and that's the universal current of energy in the body. That's kind of like our body has, we use our weight in ATP a day. Even though we only have a handful of grams of ATP, it's constantly turning over. So it's like a little rechargeable battery that gets charged and then discharges the energy, charges and then discharges. And that discharge energy is used to create all the, your muscle movement, your brain activity, everything that makes your body move and be alive. I mean, in part requires, I think there's more to it than just ATP. There's like probably life force and chi and other things. But at least from a molecular biology perspective, it seems that ATP is the primary source of energy. And so studies have shown, like there's a study in 2019 by Zhang, that PMF increases ATP up to 600%. Now, the average of that study was about 100% increase, which is still very significant. But they saw up to 600% increase in ATP. And it makes sense to me, too, because when PMF is inducing current flow. So the electron transport chain, that is a flow of current. It's like kind of a downhill flow of current where, it's there's these 5 complexes in the mitochondria, and essentially FADH and NADH2 are come out of the Krebs cycle, right? And those are like condensed you can think of them as condensed stores of electrons. And so these then pass the electrons from complex 1 all the way down to cytochrome C oxidase, which is complex 4. That's where oxygen docks. And that's, of course, oxygen's the final electron acceptor. So now, and this is interesting how the two tie together when we'll get to nitric oxide, because when you increase circulation, you get more oxygenation, so you get more oxygen to the mitochondria. And that also helps because the oxygen's pulling the electrons down this. In fact, half of the electron transport chain comes from oxygen, the electronegativity of oxygen. So without oxygen, we resort to glycolysis, which only produces 2 or 4 ATP molecules versus 38. So this is important. So PMF is kind of, in many ways, helping to push this flow of electrons that then pump out hydrogen. You get this mitochondrial membrane potential, right? So the hydrogen gets pumped out, and then at the last complex, complex 5, which is ATPase, this is where now ATP is created, or you can say recharged from ADP. And so, and this is where now the protons flow back downhill, and it's this electrochemical gradient that's driving this rotor. It's like a little molecular rotor, ATPase. It's really cool when you look at some of the molecular biology of it. And through this little rotor, the energy of that rotor is what kind of helps to recharge ATP. So, and there was a study showing, I forget who did the study, that PEMF enhances ATPase activity as well. So, and interestingly, the Zhang study, it was using low intensity. And I find it interesting that there's an expert in PEMF that promotes high intensity. He loves to quote that Zhang study, not really realizing that he promotes high intensity. But that study is done with low intensity, and yet every podcast I listen to him is like, wait a minute, you're quoting a study that's low intensity, and you keep recommending high intensity.
Yeah.
But so there's really good research, and then even like a study by Chang in 1982 showed that like electrocurrents also increase ATP 300 to 500%. And again, what does PEMF do? We're trying to induce those microcurrents. So I call PEMF 3D microcurrent therapy because it's very similar. I think it's redundant to use both microcurrent and PEMF. I don't think you really need microcurrent therapy because PEMF just works better.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a greater volume of air. You can cover a larger volume. There's less resistance. It's less invasive. You don't have to surgically implant electrodes. And again, it's using your own body's natural charges in conductive pathways. You're not like, you get like with like TENS units, you can get little microelectrocutions, at like because you're adding electricity to the body. PEMF is inducing that healing electrical flow within the body. So whether it's ATP or nitric oxide or all these other mechanisms, it seems to all start with this flow of electrons. Like Albert Georgi, I can never pronounce his name, the great Hungarian Nobel Prize winner, he would say life is but a flow of electrons, and that's not the whole quote, but that's the essence of the quote, right? So it really, when you really contemplate ATP and all these, the flow of energy, even in the meridians, that's probably just bioelectricity. It really is, in one sense, life is, a flow of electrons.
Yeah.
And PEMF gets that flow going, gets that energy moving and going.
And you mentioned the nitric oxide, for our listeners, is that the production of nitric oxide, or is it putting nitric oxide into the body, or is it making use of nitric oxide? How is PEMF influencing the nitric oxide levels in us?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the more well-researched aspects of PEMF. In fact, there was just a Mayo Clinic study in 2020 that showed that PEMF increases nitric oxide. And it increases, of course, the endothelial nitric oxide, which is the beneficial nitric oxide. Because nitric oxide is sort of Janus face, like the Greek the god that's got two faces, right? So nitric oxide can be bad and it can be good. But in its good form, from the endothelial nitric oxide or the neuronal nitric oxide, which are the good, see, it's the induced nitric oxide, the INOS, at the cell level that can cause oxidative stress. But typically, not to get too confused on that, let's just focus on the good, because this is what PEMF helps to enhance. And so endothelial nitric oxide is basically like, it is a gas, but of course it's in our body kind of in solution in a sense, but it does help to stimulate the widening of the blood vessels. In fact, it has a kind of a relaxing effect. It kind of relaxes the blood vessels so they can widen. And there's a principle in physics called Poiseuille's law, and it shows that the resistance of any fluid through a tube decreases when you widen the tube. In fact, it decreases by a fourth power of the radius, which means if you widen the blood vessels just a teeny tiny bit, you get a tremendous reduction in resistance and blood flow. This is huge because what's one of the leading causes of death? It's heart attack and cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
And it's people's, it's the clogging of their arteries. And so if you can get just a little bit of widening, again, that fourth power, the radius of the artery, the fourth power, just a little tiny bit of increase and it creates a tremendous reduction in resistance. And when I say reduction in resistance, that means the blood can just flow easier. But PEMF also helps to lower the viscosity of the blood to make it wetter, in a sense, quote unquote. So it makes, because people that have typically diabetes is a good example, because they have all that sugar in their blood's like maple syrup. It's like really sticky, high viscosity blood, which is like not what you want, because you want your blood to flow nice and easy.
Mm-hmm.
And so they end up having to take like blood thinners, but PMF is a natural energetic blood thinner in a sense. So nitric oxide is huge. In 1992, it was the molecule of the year. It got like Time Magazine's molecule of the year. And there were 3 researchers in nitric oxide won the Nobel Prize for its discovery for these enhancing effects. And, things like Viagra, I don't know if you know this, but Viagra was initially developed as a heart medication to increase nitric oxide. So, nitroglycerin. And so even our big pharma, they know nitric oxide, if they can somehow increase nitric oxide, they're going to help our heart health and our cardiovascular system. Mm-hmm. And down at the cellular level, there are some mechanisms, like Arthur Pillow was one of the ones that studied this very well. This is a very well detailed mechanism how PMF works, and it's the calcium calmodulin nitric oxide synthase pathway. So essentially, they found PMF stimulates the endoplasmic reticulum to release calcium. And then PMF will help calcium to bind to calmodulin, and through a kind of a complex set of reactions, it stimulates cyclic GMP that then goes to it's a messenger molecule or a signaling molecule, which you mentioned we're going to maybe talk about. And then it helps to tell the DNA to upregulate, say, anti-inflammatory cytokines, downregulate inflammatory. But in this whole process, nitric oxide is released as well. So you get like a generation of nitric oxide from a PMF stimulation. But you got all these other benefits happening concurrently too. So there's many ways. I mean, we know PMF increases nitric oxide, and there's some proposed mechanisms, but it's probably not still 100% understood. Mm-hmm. But you can certainly see you put PMF into someone's body, nitric oxide comes out. So it's definitely it's stimulating nitric oxide production, the good nitric oxide.
Yeah, no, good. And it would be cool to see some studies that are, measuring those, and we can link some of those on the bottom of this episode. So another area we want to talk to you about, because it's an area that you've done some videos on, and quite more hard hitting ones is the Alibaba and the kind of multi-therapy mats that we talk about. Yeah. And we've mentioned them on the podcast before, because I always kind of say that no PMF mat is worse than not, than investing in something. But there are some brands where you don't get as much as, bang for your buck than you can get. So we've done podcasts on it. You've done videos on it. You go quite into detail on these. Maybe not the best examples of PMFs. So, what are your views on these multi-therapy mats? Considering at the moment they're, probably the most marketed mats.
I have some very strong opinions on it. So the good news is I do not have to mention any brand names, because they're very easy to identify.
Yeah.
And so I tell people, if a PMF mat has crystals or gemstones in it, it's pretty much garbage. And it's not that there's anything wrong with crystals or gemstones. It's just there's no good PMF devices that use crystals or gemstones or claim negative ions, or all these gimmicks. They're just gimmicks. And the reason I can speak so strongly on this is I have 12 of these mats. I've dissected them, and I thought maybe one of them would break the mold. Like these are the coils, inside. Just everything about these are one of the mats you really do want to avoid. I wouldn't use one of these if someone gave it to me for free. But in general, you're right. If you have any PMF device with an actual signal generator, that's not just pulsing 60 hertz from the wall, you're going to get some benefit.
Yeah.
But how can you get benefit from any of these gemstone mats? And again, it's very simple. And unfortunately, these are the most aggressively marketed mats right now. And sadly, they're probably the best-selling mats, even though I hate to use the word PMF. To me, they're EMF mats. Yeah. Because it's 60 hertz. How can you call that? It is PMF technically, but it's coming there. You understand? Or in your country, it's 50 hertz.
Yeah.
So there's no signal generator. You understand their frequency, what they call frequency, is just the repetition rate. They're just chopping up the 60 hertz at different repetition rates. So on every single setting, on every single one of these mats, you just see on an oscilloscope, you just see a 60 hertz carrier wave.
Yeah.
It's 60 hertz everywhere.
So that's what I think you refer to it as. Is it dirty electricity, or some people have?
Well, there's two components to it. It's electrosmog is by Magna Habas, a worldwide leader in electrosmog research, and she breaks it down into actually 4 different subdivisions. So one is just 60 or 50 hertz. Just by itself, 60 hertz, for example, suppresses melatonin. There's actually 3 studies on that I found. And 60 hertz by itself is an electrosmog. It's not a good frequency to be putting into the body. Even if you had a signal generator that generated a clean 60 hertz, that's not good. You don't want to use 60 hertz, a 60 hertz sine wave. So, but now piggybacking on that is what's called dirty electricity. So dirty electricity comes in part from the power company. About 30% of it comes into your house from the power company and traveling along the way. But most of the dirty electricity is coming from your household appliances, and things like Tesla, especially Tesla chargers and solar panels are really bad culprits. But any like electrical, like dimmer switches, what they're doing is a lot of these modern electronics and even big heavy appliances are putting into your circuit higher frequencies, because a lot of the circuits are pulsing the 60 hertz to try to get more. I'm not an electrical engineer, but there's reasons why they're like taking the 60 and they're trying to pulse it at really high frequencies, and that gets unfortunately reintroduced into your circuit. So you do want to like test your house if you can, using a tri-field meter or like Cornet, or I have a couple other meters too. And you can go around and actually get some filters too. You can test actually dirty electricity you test with either a Stetzer meter or a green wave, or this guy BD Static Shield's got a good meter. You basically plug it into the wall and it will tell you a relative number on how much dirty electricity you have. And then you can apply filters to lower that, right? So the problem with these mats is because they're just taking 60 hertz from the wall, in the electric field, now the magnetic field, this is a really high induction coil. And so you're not going to get much dirty electricity in the magnetic field component because the high induction kind of smooths it out. But in the electric field component, when and the problem with those mats is they're recommending you sleep on them. Like, oh yeah, you can just sleep on it all night. So, the thing about dirty electricity and 60 hertz, it's potentially carcinogenic. And I have a page where I've linked up 60 studies on the harmful effects of dirty electricity and 60 hertz. So this is not just my opinion.
Yeah.
There's very good research. Now, it's not a settled science because correlation isn't necessarily causation.
Yeah.
But there are very good correlation studies with leukemia and 60 hertz and dirty electricity and other types of cancers. In fact, there was a study with electric blankets. People sleeping with electric blankets all night, they're getting 60 hertz and dirty electricity right next to them, right? And there was a link to cancer with it. But again, it was a correlation. It's like, well, that's not causation, but it's still a very high, it's like a low p-value. I mean, it's got a very high statistical significance in the correlation. So this is why I'm so against these mats. It's because I don't have anything against the companies. And, gemstones are harmless enough. They're not going to create negative ions, and that's provable fact. So, I mean, we can go into it at all. I mean, there's nothing about these mats that's any good. And it's good that we're talking about it because I do many phone consultations every day. And these mats, again, I won't name names, but there's especially a couple brands that are really heavily promoting. And people are like, oh yeah, I got this mat. What do you think? It's like, oh no. I say, send it back for a refund if you can. Or don't buy it, of course, if you're looking to get it. And the reason people are getting scammed by these mats is that they're a lower price. And like you said, they're claiming all these therapies. It's like, we got red light therapy, negative ions, far infrared, PMF all in one. Look, they only got PMF over there. It's like, so it sounds, and they use that in clever and very aggressive and very, and to give them credit, they have very good marketing. But they're marketing stuff that you can get on Alibaba for under $100 or around $100. I got a popular brand for $109. Same green, same black mat, same green stitching. It just had a black top instead of the logo of the mat. It's a very $109, same 3 coils, same 4 frequency settings. On the oscilloscope, it looked the same, but one was 1200 and one was 109. So it just shows you how cheap they are.
I think they're all going to price each other out on the market eventually as well. Because as you say, like, you know, we actually see a new brand of that same mic kind of pop up every other day.
Oh,
it's crazy.
month.
So
every month, yeah. I mean, sauna companies and red light. I couldn't believe it. Alex Fergus, a trusted red light influencer, is recommending one of these mats. It's like, you know, so. But they're not. They might understand red light therapy well, or infrared or sauna therapy, but they clearly don't understand PMF if they're promoting these.
But then
these
the red
mats.
lights on those as well. I mean, I think you've measured the irradiance, haven't you, on those?
Yeah.
So even that's
yeah. Well, that's the thing. There's nothing about those mats that's any good. So the irradiance is well below 5 milliwatts per centimeter squared. And Michael Hamlin in Good Photobiomodulation Research says you need at least 5 milliwatts to be effective. Less than that, it's pretty much just Christmas tree lights. I mean, and I did an experiment where I bought Amazon Christmas tree lights, and I have a $2,000 spectroradiometer, because again I do red light therapy, so I wrote a book on red light therapy too. I know a lot about that. So I know how to properly measure light. You don't use a solar meter. You have to use a spectroradiometer. And this is what some of these companies, they get their solar meter, and it looks like they got more irradiance than they do.
Yeah.
And solar meters are for measuring the sun that's 93 million miles away. They're not meant for measuring LEDs. But that's another story. But essentially, when I got the Christmas tree lights in a popular PMF brand that has red light, the irradiance of the Christmas tree lights was around 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared. The irradiance of these bulbs was like 1.3. It was barely better than a Christmas tree light. I mean, it's just decoration.
Yeah.
And then the area, when you take a ruler and you measure the area of the bulbs, because there's only a handful of these LEDs, it ends up being like almost a little bigger than the size of your thumb. I mean, so you're not getting much red light anyway, not much coverage. It's very low area.
Yeah.
So you're not getting red light therapy from any of those mats. And I know at least all the popular ones. Like you said, they're coming up one a month just about now.
Yeah.
So I can't keep up with them, but all the ones I've tested have a really, really low irradiance. And again, they claim negative ions. I have a $500 negative ion counter. There's 0 negative ions in those mats. That's a scam.
Yeah.
In fact, I talked to Dr. Bill Lee at Alpha Labs. Alpha Labs makes a really good negative ion counter. And it's funny, one of these popular companies used his ion counter to somehow show negative ions. And I'm like, does he have a negative ion generator going in the background or something? Because I called Dr. Bill Lee, and he's the owner/chief engineer of Alpha Labs. PhD, he's got a PhD in superconductivity, okay? He got so tired of people buying his meter for these mats, because people that had these mats would buy his meter to try to show people they got negative ions, but they're like, why are we getting 0? So it's like, you don't get negative ions from crystals. So he did his own test. He heated up crystals, and he found that he got negative ions at 1100 degrees. You literally had to keep turning up the heat. So at a certain point at 11, but then you got positive ions too. So you get both, and positive are like from forced air, heat, and air conditioning. You don't want the positive ions. Those are the free radicals, right? So you get both, but you get barely any at all.
Yeah.
But again, of course, you can't lay on a 1100 degree mat. That's like half the temperature of lava. I mean, so it's just a scam. Even the far infrared, it uses silicone wire, which I found on Alibaba for 10 cents a meter. And I measured a popular mat. They had 18 meters, so that's $1.80 in heating elements. In fact, I did an inventory. These coils on Alibaba, you can get these for like a couple dollars. I mean, I did like an inventory of how much these mats cost. And when you add up all the crystals, $3.50 a kilo, you can get those crystals. They're not good crystals. I mean, there is something to gemstone therapy, but you have to get high clarity, well cut stones. You can't just get what they use is just, I mean, it's the lowest quality. But the worst part of it is the PMF. And these are not good coils, by the way. These high induction coils kind of suck the PMF energy right into the coil. So the PMF drops off a cliff. So you get all these big dead spots in the mat.
Yeah.
course, it's probably for the best because it's just 60 hertz. But I mean, you want like nice circular coils, or I mean, this is a better way to, because the flux is going through the middle into the body.
Yeah.
Here it's going it's kind of going sideways around, and you do get a hot spot right on top of it. But then you get all this dead space in between. So it's just, there's nothing about those mats, and they're the top sellers, sadly. So I just do my best to try to steer people. First, when I do a consultation, I literally have to steer them away from those mats. Step one.
Yeah.
Almost everybody is seeing ads for them.
That's the thing. And like you say, I also the same, I don't hold anything against the owners of those companies. I've met a lot of them. I've spoken to a lot of them. I think it's naivety a lot of the time. It is. And they also seem to produce lots of different things. So it's not just PMF. They have sauna blankets. They have step-in saunas, and they're getting them all off of Alibaba. And, they might think that that's a good source of therapy devices. But, like you say, in terms of it, it's not. We know.
It's not. No, it's not. And even their sauna blankets, to me, I mean, those, we won't get into that in this talk, but, but it's like, a lot of that stuff, you can literally get the same ones in Alibaba for a fraction of the price, but they're not high quality.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the same problems with the dirty electricity and the electric field component on some of those. I mean, you just have to, you really do get what you pay for. I mean, not that you have to spend, I have the Pulsed XL, which is a super expensive, $40,000. You don't have to spend $40,000 on a PMF device.
Yeah.
But I mean, you do in general kind of get what you pay for. So I haven't found, honestly, a whole lot of PMF devices, full body mat devices under $2,000 that I can really get behind anymore.
Yeah.
I wish I could. I mean, there's a couple. I mean, if people are like, well, I'm just not going to spend more than $2,000. I have one brand that I reluctantly affiliate for, but it's not my first choice. I try to tell people to save up for quality, which you can. Yeah. I found you can get from $3,000 to $4,000. There's really good options in starting at $3,000, kind of in that range. You don't. But you do kind of need to spend a little bit to get quality.
And we mentioned that before on the on this podcast that the PMF systems specifically, they cost a bit of money to produce. There's a lot of copper in them. Yeah. You got to get decent coils that give you good coverage and all that sort of thing. So if you buy cheap in the PMF industry, usually you buy twice. So it's
exactly buy cheap. It's a saying: you buy cheap, you buy twice. I mean, that's a good. I use that myself actually, because in the case of these, you also waste your time. Your life is too precious to be wasting time with cheap, ineffective Chinese garbage. I mean, I'm not saying everything from Alibaba is bad, but I've had. I mean, again, with the red light beds, we got beds from China initially because I work with Red Light Bed Company, and it was a disaster, just an absolute disaster. So, I mean, my experience with China is not energy medicine wise. And I've come to a point where I tell people, try to avoid getting energy medicine products from China, because just based on my sample size of trying, I mean, it's not good experience that I've had.
No, for sure. So you mentioned slew rate earlier in the podcast, something I wanted to touch on, because you've also shown some of the different coils and all that sort of thing, and how they kind of work. So what's slew rate, and how is that important in terms of PMF therapy?
Well, I mean, it's probably the most important thing, along with, you could say you can make a case for magnetic resonance also as another possible mechanism. But when you look at, say, just wireless chargers, like this is like a little phone charger. In fact, if you got like a MagSafe charger, like the by Apple, because there's basically a little mini PMF coil inside here. So the only two ways that you can use a magnetic field to wirelessly transfer energy is inductive coupling, which is what slew rate comes in, and magnetic or resonant inductive coupling, which is resonance. So, but the thing about slew rate is it's a much more clear, straightforward understanding of how it works. Because it's basically you're basically using a magnetic field through Faraday's law to induce an electric field that then in the presence of a conductor like copper or your body will create an electrical current or a microcurrent in your body. It's just a very microcurrent. So with resonant inductive coupling, it gets more complicated, because you have to look at like the Q factor of all the different resonances of all the different, tissues and organs. And, Q factor is just like kind of on a radio transmitter receiver. It's the frequency that a circuit is tuned to.
Mm-hmm.
So, the higher the Q factor, the better the resonance effects. But then you've got to be very specific with your frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem with that approach is, obviously we don't really know, even though there are good studies to show all the different frequencies in the human body. This is the problem also with sine wave systems, is that a sine wave is only one frequency at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to do this, if you're trying to do this frequency for the muscle, then you got to do this frequency for this. And then we don't even know, there's not any well understood, because, molecular reactions can have resonant frequencies, the organelles, the cells, the tissues, the organs. So really to me, the only really way to do that is to try to get a broad spectrum, like a multi-wave oscillator approach, where you're just getting all the frequencies at once, like a good multivitamin.
Yeah.
Like Lekowski talked about with his multi-wave oscillator, right? So if you introduce all the different resonances at the same time, in theory, you can resonate with all the different. But slew rate's a little more straightforward, because in effect, it does, first of all, it'll ring all the different cells and tissues to their natural resonant frequency. So, because it's kind of like a kind of just banging. So you can get that resonant effect even with a high slew rate signal. In fact, a square wave, the sharper the rise time on that square wave, typically through Fourier mathematics, means you're going to have a broader spectrum of frequency. So it turns out you get the best of both worlds with the square wave, which is, if when you understand that slew rate is how quickly. Well, let me just back up here. It's probably helpful to explain how PMFs are created. So, basically Ampere's law says if you have a current going through a wire, there's a magnetic field that circulates around the wire. So a current creates a magnetic field.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, if we wrap that wire into a loop or a solenoid, all the field lines reinforce in the middle, and you get basically a bar magnet, the same magnetic field as a bar magnet, especially with a long solenoid. So now we know magnetic therapy is good, just even static magnets, but PMFs work better, as the Eastern European studies showed. But now what we can do with electrical circuit and having the right electronics, unlike static magnets, now we can get this magnetic field to vibrate and ripple in different complex ways. And it turns out the faster you can vibrate the field, the more energy is. This is Faraday's law of induction. Faraday's law says, so we got Ampere's law creates a magnetic field from a current, in a wire. And we wrap it into a loop and we get a nice magnetic field, just like a bar magnet. And it is important to understand that these are closed loop magnetic fields. So they're not radiating away. So the frequencies in your magnetic field, you can't really, I've heard people just incorrectly try to relate it to, like, 10 hertz is a low ELF. It'll be, the wavelength would be miles and miles long, which is not incorrect if you have a radiating field. But here the 10 hertz would be vibrating. It'd be 10 vibrations a second in the field. It's not an electromagnetic wave. We're not radiating fields away. Unless you get high intensity and high frequency PMF, then you can get some radiation fields going. That's the radiation formula. But essentially, slew rate is saying the faster you change the magnetic field, the more current you induce in a conductive medium that's nearby. So, if we're trying, as Arthur Pilla, as they initially did with the original bone stimulator, to create microcurrents non-invasively, the higher the slew rate, which is how quickly the magnet, it's measured in dBdt, which is Tesla per second. So the faster the slew rate, the more Tesla per second you get. And it's like the slope of like if you take a square wave, you're never going to get a perfect square wave. It's going to be a trapezoid, right? Because you can't have an infinitely fast rise time. So it's just a theoretical, so a square wave, we're typically talking about trapezoid or other, sometimes it comes through as, like with Robert Dennis's, it's almost like a sawtooth, but it's that fast rising edge that you want.
Yeah.
Okay, and it can even be an impulse, where you just got this impulse of just fast rising magnetic field. But it seems a square wave works better than the impulse because you have a better pulse duration. But it's essentially, an impulse is just a square wave with a very short pulse duration, right? And the NASA study showed that the square wave was working the best for neuronal stem cell production.
Yeah.
And they looked at triangle waves, they looked at sine waves, they looked at sawtooth, and the square wave even beat the impulse. But so slew rate is, I think, and I've done a couple of videos on this, I think it's probably the most important parameter, and we should be combining comparing PEMF devices by their slew rate, not by intensity. Intensity has nothing to do with, well, in the sense of its relationship to rise time, but intensity alone is not how energy is transferred wirelessly.
Yeah.
And again, what is a PEMF device? It's a whole body like charging plate. I mean, your body is laying on, just like your phone is on a charging plate with little tiny PEMF coils. With now again, they use higher frequencies, but it's the same principle. It's wireless energy transfer through Faraday's law of induction. So slew rate is even, how your phone is getting charged.
Yeah.
The higher the slew rate, the better the charging. So it's very straightforward physics, and I don't understand why people are still talking about intensity so much. It's like, oh, how many Gauss does your device have? It's not about the Gauss. I mean, it's about what is the Tesla per second, or you can say the Gauss per second.
Yeah. I think we need to find a nomical value or way of showing slew rate better in the market. I think that's the best, because it's at the moment people just have this number of Gauss, and that's what they're comparing devices to. So
right, and it's okay, and you actually do have to know the peak Gauss to calculate slew rate. So essentially, you get an oscilloscope, and this is a quantum effect probe, a quantum Hall effect, right? So the Hall effect probes are basically you have to. It's hard to measure the peak intensity of a very fast changing magnetic field. You can't just use a Gauss meter. I've seen some people incorrectly use Gauss meters. You're not going to get an accurate value that way.
Yeah.
No, but you got to get a Hall effect probe that has a sensitivity to whatever, because the faster the rise time, the harder it is to measure. But obviously that's what we want. So, but essentially you're looking on an oscilloscope and you're finding the peak intensity, and then you zoom in the window to see. You can kind of see how quickly you go from the bottom of the pulse to the top, and that's going to be your rise time. So it's rise over run. So it's the intensity, the peak intensity, divided by the rise time, which you have to use an oscilloscope to get this. And you can get a pretty good value. I mean, it's going to be plus or minus a little delta error, but you can get a pretty good number on what the slew rate is. But it would be nice. I'd love it if an engineer could find a way just to have a meter, but they'd have to have it very sensitive. It's not as easy as you might think.
And I think that's what the market needs, really, is to be able to put that number to a device. Yeah,
I mean, I think I'm not an engineer, but it seems to me it's doable to maybe make a little handheld device that tells you what the Tesla per second is of a signal. But unfortunately there is no such device, and I've looked. There isn't one that I've been able to find. You have to get an oscilloscope. You have to get a sensitive quantum effect or a quantum Hall probe. And even Robert Dennis's studies on when he puts his signal in the slew rate, he uses a quantum Hall probe as well. And and so in published studies on slew rate, that's what you got to do. So unfortunately, almost no companies list slew rate, except for Robert Dennis does in his ISIS.
But and for benefit of our listeners, we had Dr. Robert Dennis on a podcast a few episodes back. So if you want to, we've mentioned him a few times. So if you want to reel back and listen to that one, then you can understand what we're talking about. And it's good that you mentioned obviously the square wave too, because it seems to be quite a common feature with these podcasts, is that square wave seems to be coming out as the best one, the most effective one. So it's good that you mentioned that and brought that in there. One other thing that you're quite vocal about online is how other experts in the PEMF industry, you kind of alluded to this person before, uses the inverse square law when it comes to PEMFs. You refer to it as the inverse square flaw. Can you briefly describe to our listeners, firstly, what the inverse square law is, and why, in your opinion, the other person's kind of made some inaccurate calculations around this?
And the thing is this is not even an opinion, because it's just he's just wrong. I mean, and he's been pointed, even Robert Dennis he pointed this out to him, because I had a conversation with Robert Dennis about it. Again, we don't have to name names here. I mean, Robert Dennis is fine. I'm just saying this other person.
Yeah.
But he's a leading expert in PMF. Unfortunately, he's kind of the one that people think is the main PMF guy. And he's recommending high intensity because of the inverse. And it's like people are like, Bryant, so what? He used the inverse square law. It's like, well, his book on PMF, half of his recommendations are based on the inverse square law. And it's giving you intensities that are literally up to 100 times greater than what they need to be. Even if you follow his own advice, because he's really big on this Masari-Varani study on inflammation, where you need to get 15 Gauss or 1.5 millitesla into the tissue, right? So he says, okay, to get 1.5 millitesla, say into the middle of your brain, that you got to get 6 inches in. So based on the inverse square law, I'm going to recommend you get a device that's 6,000 Gauss. But when you use the Biot-Savart law, which is the correct equation, again, it depends on the size of the coil. This is the big problem. So the inverse square law assumes a point source. So I tell people, listen, if you don't understand my video on how I'm trying to debunk him, can you just understand that PMF coils are not all point sources? This is not a point source, clearly.
Yeah.
A point source is a speck of dust. So he's basically saying, now I have a coil here that is 1.6 inch diameter. Now, it turns out Dr. Pollack's tables are not too far off for this coil.
Yeah.
Okay. But now when let me get this coil right here. I mean, some of your listeners aren't going to be able to see it because it's a podcast, but just imagine a 1.6 diameter coil versus a 10.5 inch diameter coil. I did a test with my quantum Hall probe, and I did the Biot-Savart law calculations, okay? This is the test to debunk it once and for all. I'm going to put this into a video here soon. I did it before, but I almost need to do a separate video because it so definitively debunks it. So at 5 inches away, just to give the short version, this coil, or the 10.5 inch coil at 5 inches away, if we have the same surface intensity, let's assume this is 100 microtesla, this is 100 microtesla. At 5 inches away, this loop is 100 times more intensity than this loop. Okay, now according to Dr. Pollack, they're going to all drop off the same.
Yeah.
That all coils are the same. Every one drops off by the inverse square law. But see, the Biot-Savart law, and doesn't it make sense that the size of the coil would matter here? And because to create a magnetic field in a large coil, you need more current to create the same intensity because the flux is greater. So you can think of the energy in a coil around a PMF coil, it's more related to the flux, which is area times intensity. So area times intensity, roughly. It's an integral. You got to integrate, but just it's a rough approximation. So I calculated the penetration depth. I used the Biot-Savart law, and it's 0.97 R. It's about R. So the penetration depth is a 1 over E, or that's where the surface intensity becomes 37%. 1 over E is about 37. So it turns out it's like a dome. It's just take whatever coil you have and just turn it into a hemisphere, almost like you're making a sphere out of it, right? So that's the penetration depth. So a bigger coil is going to have a much bigger dome of energy, right? The radius is going to be up here, where here it's way down here, and that's the penetration depth. So you can see that with a bigger coil, your penetration depth is up way up, much higher up versus, with a smaller coil, it's not nearly as much.
Yeah.
And again, and my Biot-Savart law calculations were only within 4 to 5% off. I was actually surprised at how accurate that the Biot-Savart law is. I mean, it was almost where Dr. Pollack's numbers for the big coil at 5 inches away were 7,100% off.
Yeah.
71 times. So he was recommending for a 10.5 inch coil intensities that are 72 or 71 times higher than they need to be. So it's a scam. I mean, he's promoting high intensity for no good reason, and it's not even about intensity anyway. It's about the slew rate. That's how, if, at your power company, they don't have big static magnets sitting on sides of a big wire to send power to your house. No, it's rotating electromagnets, sometimes rotating static magnets, but you have to get the magnetic field in motion, which is slew rate, to create power to your house.
Yeah.
Magnetic Gauss, I tell people Gauss or Tesla, magnetic field intensity is used for measuring static magnets. It's not what you should measure PMF with.
Yeah.
So the Gauss equivalent for PMF, for a changing magnetic field, is slew rate. That's what matters, not intensity.
Yeah.
Because that's how energy, and just to show you how ridiculous it is, the Assisi loop, which is an FDA approved, they have an FDA approved human version, they have a 4 microtesla intensity. And they can get a slew rate of up to 10 Tesla per second, which is really kind of amazing. But they do that with a 27 megahertz carrier. So it turns out that the sharp steep slope of a good square wave comes from the high frequency. So you do need some higher frequencies.
Yeah.
But to me, kind of to bake the perfect square wave, you want a nice combination of frequencies that aren't too high. Because, within nature, you do get 30 to even 100,000 hertz around lightning strikes, the spherics and the whistlers and the tweets. Now, unfortunately, the megahertz is radio frequencies. That's not found in nature. So, and Robert Becker was one of the first ones in cross currents to really point this out, right? That these non-native or unhealthy electromagnetic fields that are not natural are not good for us. And they're not good for us because they're not natural. Our bodies have not evolved with them. So I'm kind of against there's some PMF devices on the market that are using higher frequencies. So I'm also against using ridiculously high intensity for daily home use.
Yeah.
Again, it may have a place in a clinical setting for like analgesic and range of motion, because it does seem to work really well for that.
Yeah.
But for home use, you want more of a medium range intensity. And again, where are most PMF studies at? 1 to 10 millitesla. So that's middle of the road. It's not super low, it's not super high, but most PMF studies, based on this big meta-analysis of 3,200 studies, 75% of the PMF studies were between 1 and 10 millitesla, which is 10 to 100 Gauss. So high intensities were only 2 to 3% of the studies, and a lot of those were transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is for psychiatry. That's not even what we're getting PMF for anyway, or most of us.
Yeah.
So it's just unfortunate because, these high intensity systems end up being very expensive too. And this is why the inverse square flaw is it's such a big flaw, is because all of his recommendations are based on it.
Yeah.
That's why, like I said, his recent book, half of it has over 30 recommendations based on the inverse square law. If you use the right equation, again, I don't have a problem with him using the Masari study for like 1.5 millitesla. I don't know if you're familiar with that study, but he quotes it a lot. If you listen to his podcast, he's constantly showing the graph, and at 1.5 millitesla, you get a saturation. So the funny thing is about that study is when you look at the I1 that they used in the study, which I did. Look, I read the study, and I contacted I1. I found out their slew rate is about 3 to 4 Tesla per second, which isn't great really. But their thing that they used on the knee had 1.5 millitesla at the surface. And here Dr. Pollack is saying you got to get 1.5 millitesla into whatever tissue you're trying to target.
Yeah.
The very study he's quoting didn't do that. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like the very study they used just 15 Gauss PMF. So he's saying you got to get 15 Gauss to wherever your target tissue is based on the inverse square law. So, and again, the reason I say this is that all of his recommendations are based on this magical 15. For him, it's like his magical number, 15 Gauss. He's going, because I get his reasoning, right? Because if this study shows that 15 Gauss can lower inflammation, then, through the A2A receptor pathway, which is a whole another thing to talk about, but that we should use PMF signals that are that intensity.
Yeah.
To me, it's the slew rate that was the key, not the intensity. But even if you're going to go by intensity, they had it at the surface, and of course, the inverse square law is not the way to calculate it anyway, right? So it's just I have a page on my PMFT.net site where I've got like 20 of his errors. It's not just it's not just one or two mistakes he's made. It's like, it's just this long list of errors, and he's just misleading people with bad science.
Are our listeners, in terms of the magnetic range, like we talk about the intensity and that sort of thing, and the inverse square law, are they able to give a rough estimation of the range of their mat using an AM frequency radio? Because we've seen people doing this in the past. You can hear the clicking, and you can move it away from the mat, and it gets further away. Is that a good way of anyone at home?
I've got a couple little meters. Even a tri-field meter, you can make it audible on the mag setting, and you can hear the field. And typically, even above a lower intensity mat, you can see it. You can still hear it like 2 to 3 feet up.
Yeah.
But it's not going to give you a good. There's no accurate intensity readings from those, right?
No. Just to give someone an idea of the range of because, as you say, like using the inverse square law that's put out there, a lot of them will say that it drops off after a centimeter, 2 centimeters. You're almost getting nothing. But using something as simple as an AM frequency radio, you can kind of give yourself an estimation of the range of that PMF mat. Is that?
Oh yeah, there's just all kinds of little things. I have a couple little ones I use for demonstrations. I got a MIC-Meg handy that makes it. Back in the early days with the IMRS, we got the MIC-Meg handy. We would do demonstrations, and we could, put it like 3 feet above someone and show that the magnetic field was still there very measurably, right?
Yeah.
So, because if it was the inverse square law, you wouldn't hear anything. Which, of course, it's not the inverse square law. But I'm just saying, if it was, you wouldn't hear anything. So that's in fact, Justin at Extreme Health Radio. When I was on his podcast, he had this expert on his podcast, and then I called him and listened to it. I'm like, and then we did another podcast, and then we went through the inverse square law, and I sent him an IMRS mat. Because he had done a lot to help me promote at the time, and he had a tri-field meter. He put his wife Kate on it, and he got his tri-field meter, and I told him put it like 3 feet up. He's like, Bryant, you're right. The needle's still bobbing even 3 feet up, and he's like, why is Dr. Pollack saying this? Or I'm sorry, I said his name. I didn't mean to say his name, but that's what he said. That's what he told me. He's like, why is he saying this stuff? And I'm like, well, you got to ask him, because he's been pointed this out. Even Robert Dennis told me he pointed it out to him, and he just won't. He's too stubborn. He won't change. And this is doing the whole industry a disservice, because he's one of the leading spokespeople for PMF. And he's just giving out bad information. It's just bad information. It's not even an opinion. I don't have a problem with someone like having a healthy debate over a topic where there's two legitimate sides to the debate. But it's the Biot-Savart law is the equation. You can't use the inverse square law when that's not the right equation. That's just wrong. That's not an opinion. That's not a wrong opinion. That's just a wrong. It's just flat out wrong. And again, I've done the tests. And again, when I did the calculations of the Biot-Savart law, and I got such a close match to my quantum effect probe, I was like, I got goosebumps. I'm like, holy cow, math works. These laws of physics, you can measure. You can actually do an experiment and confirm these laws of physics. It really is the Biot-Savart. Of course, I knew it was, but it's like to really see it with your own measurements. It's like, wow, it's like you feel like you're making a discovery, right?
Yeah.
And with the inverse square law being like so ridiculously off of what I was actually measuring, which is the most accurate way to measure a magnetic field with this quantum effect probe, it's like it just proves that it's what he's saying is wrong. He's not wrong by a little. He's wrong by up to 10,000% with large coils.
Yeah. No, it's interesting.
That's 100 times. That's a huge error. Imagine trying to publish a paper with 100% error. A 10,000% error. A 5%. Typically, they give you a plus or minus 5%.
Yeah.
Is the standard for studies, right? You want to be within that p-value of under 0.05, which is 5%. But so I don't get it, And again, his book, along with my book, our two books are the two best-selling PMF books, and people are buying it and they're just getting bad science. Now, he's got a lot of good information in the book outside of his recommendations. Like the first half of the book is pretty good.
For those guys that want to take a deeper dive into this, you mentioned your book. It was next point, really. So that's the PEMF, the Fifth Element of Health. If somebody wants to get this, where can they obtain that book? Just
on Amazon. Just type in, my name, Bryant Meyers, or just PMF, the fifth element of health. If you search books for PMF, my book comes up the first book. It's either mine or, Dr. Pollack's are the top 2 sellers. So it's right there. It just comes right up at the top.
So yeah, I mean, I'm going to wrap it up today. It's been amazing talking to you, but where can people find you, Brian? If someone wants to talk to you, if someone wants to have, a consultation, or if they want to just pick your brain on something, then where's the best place to start?
Just bryantmeyers.com. I mean, I do free phone consultations. You can just call my number. It's right on my website. Just my name, bryantmeyers.com, BRYANTMEYERS.com. And I do offer for people in the market. I just ask that you're in the market for a device. I offer free phone consultations. So, please do reach out to me. I'm here to help, and I'm very passionate about PMF. So I'm glad we're able to talk about some of these topics, because so many people are getting deceived with marketing and not real science and not real research. Because if you look at the real science and the real research, you really want to look for a PMF device that has the right coils, the right signal, which is high slew rate, broad spectral content. And we didn't talk about repetition rate. Repetition rate's also kind of important. But this is what's important. And you got to just not listen to just marketing hype and all this bells and whistles and all this, glitz and glitter. Look at what's most important based on research. And slew rate that we talked about, really, to me, along with the size and geometry of the coils, are the 2 most important things, because the coils are also very, very important. To get that slew rate deep into the body and throughout the body, you have to have the right coil geometry and size, right?
Yeah.
So, and you have to have the coils tuned properly with the signal. That's a whole nother topic.
No worries. No, thank you so much for your time today, Brian. And to our listeners, thanks again for listening to another episode of the PEMF Podcast. We'll leave some links under this podcast. So if you want the link to speak to Brian, we'll do that. And feel free to leave any questions under there, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And like and follow us so that we can get more guests on and encourage more people like Bryant to come in and share their stories. Thanks again.
Wonderful. It was fun. Thank you.